Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 5 of The Imperfects. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love that opening with Juan and Tilda, and it's like, oh yeah, they're definitely getting closer and closer, and just like, oh, the tension, you could just feel it in the air, and just like, yeah, because like Tilda definitely like just does not act the same way around Juan she was, like the way she was earlier in the season, so now it's like, it's really adorable. And so they're kind of having a bet on like, all right, so if Sarkov shows up, like, oh, we'll have to bet on whether he has a gun or not. But I love this, like, when you do know how messed up it is that we're actually betting on whether or not he has a gun and whether or not he's going to kill us or not. Because Juan was saying like he wasn't going to have a gun, but Tilda was saying that he was going to have one. It's like, right, they bet something. And he's like, right, if I win, you stop with the whole young, like, making fun of me being young. She's like, oh, I didn't know that bothered you so much. And, like, seeing how sincere she was when she said it, I was like, oh. And he's like, no, it's cool, it's fine. She's like, okay, just forget it then. I promise I won't do that anymore. So what is it something else you want me to do? And he's like, well, you have to go go-karting with me. And she's like, okay. And if I win, you have to give me a sketchbook. I was like, whoa, why a sketchbook? Not a sketchbook. That one. He's like, but why this one? It's just any other. And she grabs for it and it's like, oh. You're probably quite a few drawings of Tilda in there, probably. Now he's probably been sketching her a lot. And I love the whole thing of, like, that's exactly why. So, but ultimately, Sarkov didn't show up because the text pretended to be Owen. It's like, he usually capitalized bro when he texts me, so you kind of screwed up. I'm like, I was like, oh, he's such a prick. I love it. And it's like, cool. So, like, what are we going to do when we explain this to Abby and Sydney? He pulled a gun on us. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound like Alex. I mean, he's desperate. So I was like, see? I'm like, and Juan's like, that doesn't mean anything, Tilda. Like, the fact is we're lying, so it doesn't mean, but I guess it's like, right, the fact is that Sydney can believe he has a gun on him, so it kind of proves, like, he probably did have a gun on him. But it's like, I love her, like, her leaps in logic. But Sydney's the one that pointed him in the right direction of where they could potentially find Alex. And it's like, oh, like, looking at some of Owen's text messages, it's like, oh, he's talking about a ferry, so that must mean, like, there's a very specific place he must be hiding out to hide from the monsters that he made that might be potentially coming to kill him. So they kind of go off on their adventure, but things were a little rocky because Tilda overheard Juan saying, like, hey, could you kind of cut out with the jokes about the whole, like, dating thing? You know, kind of like, you know, Tilda's sensitive about that. I figured if anything, it's ironic coming from him because he's kind of sensitive about it. But I guess it's because, like, he's just like, right, it bothers her. So, like, don't joke about it. It's just like, you're making her uncomfortable. He's like, because he knows he likes her, but he doesn't want to rock the boat with where they currently are by, like, having Abby and Sydney make fun of the whole fact is of like, oh, you guys want to go on a little date and stuff, yada, yada, yada. So Tilda's kind of pissed at him. They ultimately end up finding Burke because it just happens to correlate with a mom looking for her daughter Zoe, just another one of Burke's experiments. Which also I thought was kind of interesting because we really get into Tilda's abilities. It seems like she might be the centerfold of all of this with her abilities, just because of, I just think it's interesting, and maybe this is just me reading too much into it. Like, the promotional stuff for this, like, the, like, picture they used for the show on Netflix, it's like, Abby and Juan on either one of her sides, and she's in the center of the group, so it almost feels like she is the center. To be fair, the show did open with her in particular, so that is kind of interesting too. Like, I feel like her abilities might be the centerfold of all this. Maybe might inadvertently end up being the centerfold of what Alex is up to, Sarkov is up to. We'll get to that later, but her powers are, like, growing and expanding. Like, she's being able to hear further and further and further. That it's like, oh, because Juan was like, oh my god, it almost seems like you're psychic. She's like, or I'm just like someone who can hear from very, very far away. And the fact is they're focusing on the growth, like, their ability, like, feels like Abby's might be the same way, but her power seems like it's about the same level. Juan's gotten better control over the chupacabra, but it's not, like, fully there. but it seems like Tilda's the one whose power is definitely expanding. The others are just mitigating control, but obviously Tilda doesn't have full control over hers. She's still using the headphones to like dull everything, but like her power is constantly expanding. So I think she's going to be like this special case that like Sarkov is going to need. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a second, but the fact that she can even read the frequencies of people's bodies, just because like everyone's like every like aspect of a person's body, she's even like their skeletal stuff. It's like almost kind of, as someone with an ear for music, she can almost equate it to like certain music, as she says like, oh, despite kind of the sick bastard that he is, like he kind of has a little bit of a jig. I forgot the exact word that she has. Like it's kind of like an upbeat bop to Sarkov's, and there's like a nursery rhyme element to Juan. He's like, oh, I get it because I'm so young. And she's like, no, it's because of this and that. And she's like, I told you I wasn't going to comment on you being young anymore. She's like, I'm keeping my promise. So it's like, oh, Juan's kind of like, damn, I'm kind of pissing her off again. But he's off dealing with an electric person, which once again my mind immediately thinks of like the crooked man from Raising Dion, because it was kind of a similar situation. And I love that he's like, wow, which side are you guys on? He's like, you just released a threat. Like, the fact is he refuses to take any, like, he's saying he's taking personal responsibility because he's like, right, if my experiments go out there and hurt people, it's on me. And I'm like, but what about everyone else that's been hurt because of all this stuff? I mean, especially, like, you're not considering Juan, who, like, blacked out and killed 2 people. Granted, one person was, like, I mean, he's killed some animals. He hasn't really killed people. Well, they killed Doug, so I was like, and Doug's like life being a terrible like existence, being able to just constantly in pain, and then him also, well, because he didn't kill Home Dude, he killed those trio in episode, was that 4? No, that was episode 3. Killed that trio in episode 3, and now it's like. And he also bit off the nose and so on. Granted, that was him in a little bit more control. But Sarkov just kind of doesn't care. And I love that he's like, yeah, Zoe's a level 6 on his scale of danger. You guys are a 2. And it's like, wait, what? And she even says, like, right, you labeling your experiments as threats is kind of fucked, It's like, right, you're the reason why we're quote-unquote threats in the first place. And he's kind of kind of belittling what they're going through. He's like, right, you might have a little discomfort in your life because of like your acute like hearing now and stuff like that, but he's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, and it's like you with your situation and Juan with his blackouts. Like, yeah, once again, you guys are a 2 at best. And him just feeling the need to kind of talk down to Juan because he's like, oh, like constantly throwing him like getting like a C- in science or whatever. It's like throwing that in his face. But ultimately, he finally explains what this is all about. And it's kind of what I thought it was to some extent. Like, he's trying to create, like, almost like the perfect being. And when he breaks it down, you're like, all right, it's like, okay, you have altruistic reasons for doing what you're doing, not unless you're lying out of your ass. But at the very least, you have good reasons for what you're doing. It doesn't make what you're doing any less shitty. You experimenting on people without their permission. He keeps kind of throwing it out there. There were, like, I mean, him and Sydney kind of throwing out there were, like, release forms and stuff. It's like, that doesn't make it any better. But either way, he talks about that when it comes to, what was it, climate change and human adaptability, like human evolution, there's always been like this parallel that has always been this even parallel. But as climate change has gotten worse and humans have stagnated in their evolution, so humans need to be stronger and better and more adaptable to the new environment if they're planning on surviving what is going to happen with climate change. He's like, yeah, humanity has maybe 100 years left. And every time, like, and I love, like, when Juan was getting stuff right, he's like, hey, you went from a C- to a B. And then, like, there's this look on Juan's face like, yes, see, I'm not an idiot. Like, he felt good about proving himself. But that's what this is about. This is about creating adaptability. And that's why I feel like adaptability kind of feels like it's, I think these 3 in general will be the like core to that, like everything, because they are adapting to their respective situations, which I think could be seen as adapting, like humanity potentially adapting. It's like they could be the key to what he's missing. Isabel could kind of play in that too with what we end up finding about Isabel, which we'll get to that later. But I still, like I said, keep thinking that Tilda will be kind of like the key important thing. But kind of now finally understanding what Sarkov has all been about, like understanding his circumstances, it's making a little more sense about why he's done what he's done. Once again, doesn't make it any less shitty, but yeah. So while they're walking, the town kind of comes up in the mob and is like, okay guys, we gotta run. And then Tilda and Juan are going, and he's like, oh shit. So they've got him surrounded, and they're like, put down the gun. He's like, well, I don't know if I want to. Oh, okay, that was rhetorical. Okay. And they like ship him off, and they're like basically gonna punish him. Because they're like, everything that's happened here is your fault. I even love, he's like, hey, what happened to Hank isn't my fault. They're like, what happened to Hank? He's like I said, nothing. It's like you shot yourself in the foot in that regard, because they didn't know about Hank yet. So this is all about Zoe. It's like, oh, like disappearances and stuff like that. He's like, just because some bad stuff has happened while I'm here doesn't mean I'm responsible for it. So he's about to get in big trouble. Plus, I love that Tilda knew, like, didn't tell Juan that they were heading in the direction of Zoe. Plus, they were going to leave Sarkov to kind of get tortured a little bit. It's like, right, that wasn't a mob. It was like a gang at best. But it turns out Zoe willingly did what she did. And I love Tilda being like, oh, okay, oh my God, he tricked you by telling you the truth. And Zoe's like, what? That doesn't make... It's like, well, it kind of makes some sense. It's like, right, yeah, he told you the truth, but it is a situation of like, generally no one would be an asshole to be like, oh, this is about saving the world. Then I'll do it. Like, that's why she willingly signed up for it, because she thought she was doing good. And obviously things have kind of turned out the way it has. And she's trying to stay away from her mom, because anytime she's around any electricity, she's absorbing it. So, and it's like, yeah, what happened to Hank? It's like, well, that was the second explosion. That wasn't even on you, so don't take too much fault with it. But they plan on knocking out the electricity when Zoe can go back to her family, which I love that line from Sarkov being like, okay, so you guys were about to like kill me because of a crime I didn't commit, but she straight up admits to a murder and you just kind of let her go. It's like, he's like, how is that fair? And so she's about to pop off her powers again because the second generator kicks in. Luckily, I guess just because his body is a little tougher than... Like I said, it seems like probably like enough like gunshots could kill him, but it probably does seem like maybe like the Chupacabra does have superhuman strength and kind of has durability, so it was able to kind of absorb the impact of the explosion and kind of absorb that electricity like outlet before she burst. Which is like, oh my God, Juan, you're okay. And Starkov's like, I'm okay. She's like, oh, yeah, okay. And he's like, almost like, what? So luckily everything kind of worked out in the end. I'm surprised, I'm sure her mom is going to have to deal with the fact is of like, well, she did admit to killing Hank, and the fact is that it's like, well, they also know like Sarkov's the one responsible for it. So like, right, as long as you get this mad scientist away from her, it's like it's going to be fine. It's like, well, you're also going to have to, like, Zoe's going to have to stay in one spot with no electricity. At least her mom knows she's alive and she can be around her parents. But I mean, it's not an Abby situation. It can be just as devastating. Well, not as devastating, because the Abby situation around her parents would be emotionally and physically and mentally scarring. At least this situation would be more so, well, mentally, emotionally, and physically scarring if you ended up accidentally killing your mom because you're powers, but still. So, but when it was all said and done, I love that moment between, it's like, oh yeah, he's like, because I saved your life and everything, can we go back to being friends? Which Tilda was like, when do we ever stop being friends? He's like, well, kind of your general demeanor and the way you've been treating me lately. And she kind of realized like, oh, I kind of have been a little shitty toward you. Because him saying that line of her being sensitive really like bugged her. And I don't think she really realized how much she was kind of like pissed off about it. So... But she's like, Juan, I like you. And Sarkov just inside the van, she's saying that she has feelings for you. He's like, I get it. He's like, sure you do, buddy. So there's that. So we'll circle back with everything on the other side of things. Abby and Burke trying to work on things, trying to figure out, more about... Because obviously that's what convinced Burke to go. Convinced Sarkov, like, oh, okay, so maybe Sydney is right about like maybe having some idea about this whole situation. So maybe we can work towards you guys getting cured because we'll have it all figured out. So when it's all said and done, Abby tried to talk to Hannah, and I was like, Hannah kind of wanted nothing to do with her. It's like, I don't need my pheromones to know you're potentially lying and hiding something from me. But then, like, all these texts from Isabel being like, yo, like, I hope you're not second guessing things. It's like, I have another job for you. And Hannah was like, oh, fuck, another job. She had now realized, like, right. Because once again, I thought she was all about this. I was actually surprised, and I kept waiting for the other ball to drop with Hannah, that she was ready to kind of deceive Abby again, pretending like, oh, I'm telling you everything, but this is part of like Isabel's trap. I thought that's what it was. But because once again, Hannah was all about it in like episode 3 or whatever, being like, oh yeah, I'm ready to like take down like all of these scientists, like I can do more. I think maybe when she was saying that, maybe she wanted to like beat them up and hurt them, maybe not necessarily kill them. And now it is a thing of, wow, I am an accessory to murder. She didn't initially show, and that's why she was like, right, if I'm being asked on another job, that must mean like I'm meant to like find information about someone so she can kill them. So she's not too keen on that idea. So she goes to Isabel and Sydney and tries to confess about everything. But obviously looking into Isabel, calling the cops and everything, Isabel Finch doesn't exist. And I was like, well, it could be fake ID and identity and stuff. And then they call the phone and they're like, it's in the house. I was like, wait, okay. So I was like, I had a lot of theories that weren't too far off. And it just seems like my 2 theories are one theory now. I'm like, oh, well, not one theory. It's proven in this episode. But I guess when it comes to what we find out, like, because that's where I was like, her phone being there is like, there's no way she's like hiding in here. So how would the phone get here? I was like, wait, is Sydney Isabel? And that's why I was like, that's where my 2 theories came together, because that faceless form is what her other side looks like. It's like a blank slate. Because I thrown it out there last episode, like, what if, I was like, that Isabel thing didn't make sense to me. It's like, right, you were in Burke's office, but you didn't kill him, but now you're killing all the other scientists. But then I was like, maybe that wasn't the real Isabel. Maybe, and I was like, no, maybe that's the real Isabel, and the person that's going around killing all these other people isn't the real Isabel, and that's actually the shapeshifter. But the fact is, Isabel doesn't have, well, because we never actually learned her name. Well, no, because it was definitely her, because she says later on, it's like, yeah, you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there. So it's like, no, it's definitely the same person they met in episode 1. Because I was thinking, like, maybe it's not a real name, but that person, that is Isabel's name might not be real, but Isabel might be, and a shapeshifter took on her form. That's what I was thinking. I think I threw it out there last episode. But it's her being a blank slate. She ended up mimicking, she is a shapeshifter, that's Isabel's thing, but it's not just that. She does have like that different personality. Her and it seems like the way Isabel talks about it, it's like, oh, because I think now, like in retrospect, like all those, it's like, oh my god, look at all these trophies. They were things that Sydney personally had a grudge against everyone. The previous scientists that died, whether it's Reggie, whether it's Yates, she had beef with all of them, and now these were kept as trophies. Because Isabel is her darker side, the more side of herself that sticks up for herself, the other side that just, like, Sydney's the one that's just kind of like, she's kind of like the angel on your show, is like the angel, whereas Isabel's kind of like the demon side. I'm your more negative side. I'm all the sides of yourself that, like, the more tougher side of you is kind of like a psychological split happened. And now it's like, oh, like, there's Sydney and then there's Isabel. They're 2 sides of the same coin, but they represent 2 sides of Sydney's psyche. And now her psyche has now just part of her personality, like, I think the darker side of herself is like, oh, I'm gonna get shit done. That side of herself is now personified into its own being. So because when she was talking to Hannah, she said Sydney's name. She's like, oh, and Bert. She said it with some spice that I guess she like holds resentment against Sydney too, because it's like, right, you're the reason why we are what we the way we are. I think for her it's almost like you're weak too and stuff, and like her just showing up out of nowhere. I'm like, how did you just like randomly like show up here without a problem? It's like, that doesn't make that. How'd you just roll up? You know, I mean, Tilda's not there to hear you coming, but still, like, for you to just show up out of nowhere, it's like. And then like Sid had noticed like her medication was vials were like empty or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's like it solidified it more and more as the episode went on. Just like the fact that those trophies were there solidified it even more about like that's what our circumstances are. And especially later on when she's messing with Abby, being like, "Oh, hot and cold," is like you're getting colder, and it's like, "Oh, she's not really good at this game." I was like, "Yo." I even love when Abby kicked Isabel in the chest and she hits the wall. She's like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill you." Just give me a minute. I was like, I love that this show is like weird and wacky the way it is. Even its villains are weird. I love it. Yeah, that's so interesting. And her just being like, "No, Burke, she's safe. You won't." I didn't do. I haven't. I forgot the distinction she said. She was like, I didn't do anything with her. I did something to her. She used some very specific wording like that. And so just in this moment, everyone converges. It's like, because she's like, "Okay, Hannah, do you want to finally be on the right side of things?" It's like, no. Because she knew that everything would lead to Alex getting back here, which I'm like, well, I guess she knew that she was trusting Tilda and Juan to bring him back, so I guess that's why she was so certain about it. I mean, she did once again say she was going to bide her time for them to find him, and then I guess she knew, like, oh, he'd fall right into my lap regardless. But the moment he shows up and to hear him talk about Sydney like that, it's like, right, she's like the only family I have left. She's like a sister to me. If you did anything to her, and then proceeds to transform back into Sydney. I was like, that's such a... The breadcrumbs have always been there. Like, I knew she had a split personality because of those night... Like, ever since episode 2, but, you know, and once again, with the whole Yates thing, it's like... I was like, it was interesting timing that you woke up and you're like, oh, I have a message from Yates. Like, and it was like a day ago, so she was out of... So I'm like, what was your other side doing that entire time? And even saying they all need to be destroyed or something. So I thought she was talking about... I knew that's what... Isabel was after the scientist, so I thought like this other side of Sydney was after the experiments. It's like, no, it was laid bare then. It's like, right, it's all been about killing the other scientists she feels are responsible for all of this. So now it's like, right, Isabel they now realize Sydney is one of them. And she's known on some level, but she never really realized she was manifesting side effects like powers. Because even Sarkov didn't realize it. So I'm thinking he didn't experiment on Sydney. Her attempt to heal her own circumstances, and she had experimented on herself. So Isabel probably blames her for being the weak side of herself and also creating this situation, creating Isabel. But she blames Sarkov because it's all his research in the first place, and probably like, oh, all the terrible, because she doesn't seem too broken heart about a lot of the terrible stuff he's done to other people like Isabel does. She's like pissed about everything he's done to other people, but that might be her kind of projecting her own circumstances. But Cindy never seemed too brokenhearted about like, oh, what happened to the other kids. I mean, she's helping them and stuff, but she doesn't have much bedside manner, as I've spoke about before, and now maybe that kind of plays into it. Like, she doesn't realize like what's been done to her because of Sarkov's like experiments and what she potentially did to herself using Sarkov's experiments. And I think that's why her other side, Isabel, kind of hates Sydney, maybe. Once again, maybe the weakness element, but also like, right, you're so weak, you felt the need to do this, and now I'm here. I have to be the one that handles shit because you can't get stuff done. Maybe that's where some of the resentment comes into play, but I am really fascinated to see where the hell this next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.